All right, this is day 8, and we are going to have another lesson practicing the empirical rule. That's the rule that tells us if we have what is called a normal distribution, which is a set of data that forms this bell-shaped curve, which is so common in day-to-day life, then we can predict, on average, the percentage of the data that's going to fall in certain regions based on the mean and the standard deviation. And specifically, the empirical rule tells us that if we have the mean right here in the middle, within one standard deviation of the mean, one standard deviation to the left or right, that's going to be always about 68% of the data if it's a normal distribution, if it's a nice bell curve. All right, if it's within 2 standard deviations of the mean, that should be 95% of the data, and 3 standard deviations, one way or the other, will capture 99.7% of the data. And we can use these numbers to figure out what percent of the data would be in each one of these intervals. Notice that this interval on the end does not stop, it goes forever, and this goes forever. Negative infinity, positive infinity. That's the empirical rule, 68, 95, 99.7. So let's practice this one more time. First, we are supposed to draw a diagram for this situation. This problem is about a college admissions office that needs to compare the scores of students who take the SAT with the ones that take the ACT. Suppose that among college applicants who take the SAT, they have a mean score of 896 with a standard deviation of 174. Also, suppose that among the ones that take the ACT, the scores have a mean of 20.6 and a standard deviation of 5.2. Draw the diagram. All right, of course you would sketch these two diagrams by starting off with the mean of the SAT scores. That mean was 896, and so that goes right here in the middle. And then the standard deviation was 174, so we just added 174 each time as we went to the right. And then we subtracted 174 each time as we went to the left, and that's where these numbers came from. We did everything the same for the ACT. We started with a mean of 20.6, that went right in the middle. Since the standard deviation was 5.2, that means we were to add 5.2 as we went to the right, and we subtracted 5.2 as we went to the left, and that's where we got these numbers from, okay? That's why each one of these lines represents a standard deviation from the mean. So don't forget our chart. The percentages should be as shown, including 1 standard deviation away, 68%, 2 standard deviations, 95%, 3 standard deviations, 99.7%, and all the percents divided up that way. Memorize these numbers if you have not already done so. Okay, so these arrows are bothering me and I will erase them. According to the empirical rule, about 95% of SAT, this graph, takers score between what 2 values? Well, 95%, you remember that is 2 standard deviations from the mean in both directions. So 2 standard deviations from the mean, that's 1, that's 2 standard deviations in both directions would look like this. Okay, so that's why between what 2 values? 548 and 1,244. We could write that as an interval. I guess they didn't ask it that way. Okay, between, well, I'm going to write it as an interval anyway. So 95% of the test takers score between 548 and 1,244. Okay, so what's next? according to the empirical rule. How about 95% of the ACT takers between what two values? Well, same deal. 95%, that's 2 standard deviations, 1, 2. So we're talking about from here to here. Okay, so 95% of the ACT takers score between 10.2 and 31. All right. What does the empirical rule say about the proportion of students score between 722 and 1070 on the SAT? 722 to 1070 on the SAT. Okay, well, here is 722 over here, and here's 1070 over here. So we are talking about this region of the graph. And that is within 1 standard deviation of the mean. And we have memorized, hopefully, that 1 standard deviation of the mean will capture about 68% of the data. So that is the proportion that they're talking about, is that percentage. Okay, so that is 68% of the data should be between those two numbers. What does the empirical rule say about the proportion of students who score between 10.2 and 31.0 on the ACT? Okay, 10.2 and 31.0. You know what? I might as well bring that back. I erased it and then realized it was the same thing that we just answered from up here. 10.2 and 31. We just saw that that was 95% of the data. Okay, because that is 2 standard deviations, 95% of the data. So it's really the same. It's like the reverse of question B. Okay, so 95% is the proportion. Okay, according to the empirical rule, about 68% of ACT takers score between what two values? Okay, the ACT. 68%, well, that will be 1 standard deviation from the mean, and 1 standard deviation looks like this. Okay, that is between 15.4 and 25.8. Okay, so that should be 68% of the data should be between those two numbers. And the last one, according to the empirical rule, about 99.7% of SAT takers score between what two values? Okay. I'm yawning, sorry. 99.7%, of course, that is 3 standard deviations from the mean in both directions. Okay, so we are talking about SAT takers. We need 3 standard deviations in both directions. So 3 standard deviations, well, that's 1, 2, 3 standard deviations is going to go from here all the way over to here. Okay, so this is what 3 standard deviations will look like. That's our 99.7%. So that is from 374 to 1,418. Okay, did I say 1,418? Yes, I did. All right, so that is a brief snapshot of how the empirical rule works. Now, this is our 3rd lesson on the empirical rule, and it is not our most detailed lesson. So if you need more information, we didn't even wind up using all of these percentages in between. We didn't use the 13.5s and the 2.35s. So this lesson was a little extra simple. So please go back if you want more detail on the empirical rule. Go back and check out some of the previous lessons, the previous 2 lessons on this subject. In the meantime, I will see you on the next video.